Hello, everyone. We're happy to have you here at the PractiTest webinar. My name is Rachel. I'm from PractiTest. So today we have Melissa Tondi, our guest, to talk about the lazy tester, Mussings on being efficient. I can't wait to hear her. But a few words before I introduce her properly and start the actual webinar, I just want to invite up. Wait, why is it obviously not working? Yeah, I just want to invite you all to sign up for the online test conf that's happening on November 29th. Go ahead to www.onlinetestconf.com and register. It's worth it. It's a free online testing conference with the best speakers. Other than that, we have some upcoming public training sessions for PractiTest users or those who are looking into PractiTest. So check out the dates and sign up. So with no further ado, I want to introduce Melissa. So Melissa is the Director of Quality Engineering at Guild Education, and she's the Principal at Disrupt Testing. And she's a speaker and a writer and a quality and process engineering enthusiast. And I can go on and on and on and on, but instead of that, I will just let her speak and let her share her screen because that's probably much more interesting. So yeah, Melissa, the stage is yours.
All right. Excellent. Thank you so much, everybody. Happy to be here. I will admit, I have been putting this slide deck in particular together for probably the last 10 to 15 years. It really is kind of a culmination of all of the things that I have experienced, and I have met with many, many others who have kind of experienced this. And when we look at the title, the lazy tester, a lot of times we think about lazy as being negative. It has a negative connotation in there. And I want to kind of stretch us to think about being lazy as something a little bit less negative and maybe a little bit more on the positive. So when we think about being lazy, right, we have a lot of perceptions, and these were all perceptions that were applied to me in some point in my life, whether I was growing up as a kid or whether I was moving into high school, college, university, and then even in my employment, in my career development. A lot of times when people think of being lazy, a few of these may pop into your mind. You're not capable of completing tasks. You start something, but you're so lazy, you just don't complete tasks. You're not creative. Why would a lazy person have any kind of creative thinking or licensing kind of driving them? You may be perceived as not being creative. You have no passion. If people perceive you, or if you even perceive yourself as being lazy in the more negative way or negative connotation, that may be one of the characteristics that comes to your mind or that comes to someone else's mind. You take too long or too slow starting new things. So maybe some of these, and your inability to work hard, right? Where work hard is seen as something more positive than the alternative, right? So when I was growing up or in my career, I kind of had always been told, or there was always a perception that I was lazy. And when I really thought about it, I agreed, I was lazy. But like I said earlier, I want to kind of use that term and definition to kind of anchor what I'm going to be talking about here, because I think one of the best things about quote unquote being lazy are some of these great characteristics that come through when you think about it with the positive spin. So we think about what being lazy fosters, right? How many of you hand wash your dishes 100% of the time? Some of you may do that, but you may have heard this little invention called the automatic dishwasher, invented in the mid 1800s and modernized in the early 1900s. But there was someone who said, you know what, I can do something a little bit better if we automate it. I don't like to do dishes 3 to 4 to 5 times a day. And hence the automatic dishwasher came into being. How about laundry day? How many of you taken your clothes down to the river recently and beat your clothes against the rocks to clean them? Well, probably, of course not, right? The automatic washing machine, another one of those inventions that likely were bred out of quote unquote being lazy. How about when you pull up to your driveway? If you have a garage in your driveway, do you get out and manually open the garage door? Probably. Sometimes you might. I certainly did with the first couple of my houses, but hence the laziness kind of was able to bring up an excellent, in my opinion anyway, because I have one at my house, an automatic garage door opener, right? So we are constantly looking at ways to make mundane or ordinary tasks and non-interesting tasks less uninteresting by putting technology or automating them around them, right? So you can kind of see where we're going with this one. So when we think about being lazy, some of the alternatives that we might want to consider when we think, well, what is being lazy and why is that a positive? I like to think about hibernation. Bears are the ultimate lazy beings. Not only do they, have an incredible, one of the apex predators of in the animal kingdom. When they go into hibernate for their several months during the winter, they're not necessarily considered lazy. They're conserving their energy for when it's time, for when it's really active. So when we think about laziness, one of the alternatives and positive spins on that is also to think about hibernation and what hibernation actually offers to those bears or to those mammals that tend to do that, right? You're conserving your energy for when it's really time and when you really need to use that in there, right? So we start thinking about the task first rather than just do it. Your brain is activated holistically. A lot of times when people are considered lazy in the negative way, when we don't immediately react or when we might not take immediate action, that might be viewed as a negative. And I'm thinking again as an alternative, when you step back and actually put thought into that, your brain is activated holistically, but it also allows for you to plan slightly better, even if it's just a few seconds before taking action. And really going back to that other terminology where working hard is the antithesis of being lazy. Why work hard when you can work smartly? And I would say for me, embracing me being lazy, I really like the alternative of working smartly rather than hard, especially as I get older and older in my career and in my age. So hopefully if you take one or two things back from this talk this morning or today, I think let's agree that working hard should not necessarily be equated to success. I'd rather say working smartly is really the way to equate to success. All right. So let me talk a little bit about one of my stories. So as I mentioned, I embrace now my laziness. I have been told, or there was a perception about me almost my entire life because I did take a little longer to kind of start things. And again, that kind of had the perception that I maybe was lazy in the negative way. When I wake up in the mornings, I like to perfectly time my mornings so I can maximize my sleep and focus my morning on being hyper efficient. So what does that look like for me? Well, when I go into my work, I know that it takes exactly 38 minutes for me to leave my door from my house and get into the office on a variety of different transportation options there. So when I set my alarm the night before, I plan for almost exactly 38 minutes in there because I've gotten that commute down, right? And the reason I've done that, most people would say, oh, you're waking up at the very last minute. You didn't, what happens if something happens? What happens if something goes wrong? It doesn't mean that I have a lack of planning or that I don't have a plan B or C necessarily, but I do know that in most cases, my commute will roughly be on time. And I know that I can count on those 38 minutes from door to door. And in those situations, maximizing my sleep so that my brain is well rested and I can function extremely efficiently through the day is more important to me at this point, rather than leaving a lot earlier or planning more and more time on my commute in there, right? So I've gotten down to the point where I can accurately pinpoint how long it will take for me to leave my house and get to my office. And I want to maximize my sleep, right? So in this situation, being lazy for me actually equals being efficient. And if you've ever heard me talk efficiency, and it certainly says it in my bio, efficiency is one of those tenets that I strive for, right? So efficiency really is that now positive spin of being lazy. So being lazy leads to efficient. And when you're efficient and when you're efficient a lot and you are hyper focused on being efficient in your day to day, being efficient leads to optimization. And optimization really is that culmination of being efficient in your tasks with the greatest amount of delivery or outcome in a shorter amount of time. And so for those of us who have been in our QA or QE or software testing career for many times, for a long time, or even if you're just starting out in your career, you know that at the end of the day, our schedules, specifically for the testers in the house, our testers tend to get a little bit decompressed. It's very rare that when we plan a big project or big initiative that our estimates of time, especially if we estimate in those time increments, are 100% correct. We know that generally speaking, there is always some underestimation of time that results in a lot longer than what we originally thought, right? So we go with the flow in these cases because we should have our plans B and C in there, but we strive for optimization and we strive for that efficiency so that even thinking, as I mentioned earlier, even when we think about it for something a few more seconds before we act on something, it grounds us so that we can spend more time on the most important tasks at hand. And the most important tasks at hand may sound very familiar to some of you who subscribe to the risk-based testing approach, which I certainly do, or context-driven techniques. We are focusing on the most important / valuable / critical tasks at hand, because we know that that will ultimately result in the best outcome for our users. When we think about things before we act again, it allows us to avoid that analysis paralysis as well, because we wind up taking those few short seconds, coming up with that plan, or few short minutes, depending on what is your task at hand at that particular time, so that we can really fully commit to what our next action is, right? So we invest the shorter amount of time up front to plan what we're going to do and have a very strategic way to move forward so that we don't spend too much time over analyzing tasks and then wind up not actually being able to complete or deliver those tasks because we spent too much time on not as valuable tasks to begin with. So I love this quote here because this really kind of culminates where we are here. It's one thing to be lazy just for being lazy's sake. And it's certainly one thing to say you're without capitalizing on the time that you're saved when you are lazy, you are not able to be optimized with valuable and more effective tasks. So what I mean to say on this particular quote is that when you're being lazy and when you're looking at ways to optimize your time in testing, and of course we'll walk into a couple examples of what this means like in real life, but when you're not capitalizing on the time saved by being lazy, if I didn't capitalize on me really pegging my day on that 38-minute commute from door to door, and I would fill my time up with possibly and probably less meaningful and more menial tasks in there, and not really focus my efforts on the most important activity at that time, which in my world is getting the right amount of sleep so that I can be recharged, right? So being lazy without capitalizing on that time saved is still being lazy. But you want to fill that time with those more valuable and effective tasks to move into optimization, right? So we have lazy for being lazy's sake, which is not really that great of a characteristic. Then we move into being efficient. And now we move into being truly optimized. And that's really the general outcome of what we want to do with that. So let's kind of apply these roles of being lazy to some of the things that we are likely experiencing right now. And hopefully a lot of these examples hold true for you, right? So let's look about testing right now. So I'm assuming many of you are either QA, quality engineers, software testers, or you work directly with those folks in here. So a lot of what testing, there's a lot of perceptions about testing and what our roles are and what our responsibilities are. And one of those is that QA owns most, if not all, testing, right? Not necessarily an incorrect statement necessarily, but if the role of QA or QE in your organization is that QA or QE owns all of the testing, that could be a bit of a dangerous state, right? And as I mentioned earlier, if schedules don't cooperate, which you know they won't, we have limited options, right? And again, from the testing standpoint, generally speaking, unless you are fully in a TDD, a test-driven development kind of approach or culture, a lot of times we will, when those schedules give, there are very limited options that we have, right? So we're getting down to the day where we're waiting for dev complete or our software engineer counterparts to deliver code for us to actually test that. And that generally happens towards the end of the software development lifecycle in a lot of ways. And one of the last major activities before we actually deploy into production, right? Nothing new here. But generally speaking, what happens when we have a schedule issue? We generally are the ones that stay late or work longer hours to keep that release or the sprint on track, right? Very, very typical. The last couple of days of sprints, as those last few and probably large stories are rolling our way, we won't have enough time in a normal day. And so we wind up taking it for the team and working those longer hours to keep the sprint on track. Nothing wrong with that approach. But it could lead into some dangerous behavior that we'll kind of talk a little bit about shortly. What else do we have? Well, okay, if you ran out of time, okay, let's just pull in a bunch of the developers or the rest of the team and we'll run your test cases for you, or we'll help you run your test cases, right? Again, it's a great alternative in a lot of ways. But we simply are calling them, if we're handing over a bunch of test cases and assuming that we're going to have the right experience of fully testing this by just simply having folks on the team run a set of test cases. Again, not a necessarily horrible alternative, but a lot of times that diminishes the role of the tester, the QE or QA on the team by saying, well, anyone can do your job, right? It's not necessarily skilled. If you just give us the set of instructions, we'll run those and that'll just be like you testing it for us, right? We have done that many, many times to save schedules, so to speak, in my career. In present state, we have very little or no insight in some cases to any other testing that may be going on with our team, such as unit integration, acceptance criteria testing, or acceptance testing, or UAT. These are all generally testing tasks or activities that are done by other teams traditionally. In some cases, you may, some of these may be part of your function if you are a software tester, QA or QE. But generally speaking, if any of these types of tests or testing activities are done by someone other than the QA team, we very rarely have insight really into those, because those are generally not very well documented, other than say the unit or integration test. But if you have an acceptance, if you have your product manager or product owner or business analyst accepting the work, I promise you that any good PO or PM is going to be running their own sets of tests, and they may not be documented or they may not be shared widely, but there will be some testing going on there as well. Same thing with software engineers. I have worked with incredible software engineers over my career, and the very best ones are running a set of tests that they're validating their own functionality, but rarely are those types of tests documented in there so that we would have insight, as in QA would have insight into those, right? So when we don't have insight into all of the other testing activities that are going on outside of the QA team, we generally duplicate testing. And anytime we duplicate something that has already been done, and especially when that is not automated, we are introducing inefficiencies. And of course, we want to move up the scale from being that traditional lazy to the left. We want to move into being efficient and ultimately optimized. So what's the alternative? So that was kind of testing in the present state. So let's look at how the lazy tester would put their lens on those types of activities. So testing is and should be a shared responsibility within the team. So going back to that statement where QA or QE the perception may be that they are the only ones testing on the team. We really come out with our message and narrative stating that testing is a shared responsibility within the team, which means that everybody is responsible for testing their work. And in some cases, the testing may be also part of their own work as well, right? So we want to really come out strong with that narrative that testing is a shared responsibility within the team, and that QE, and you can now see that I'm using that term QE, quality engineer. And again, if you've heard me speak or have read anything that I've written in the past, I am very much on the platform of quality engineering, and I'll talk a little bit about that shortly as well. But the shared responsibility of testing across the team really is that we as in QE are guiding that testing when others in the team are sharing in that responsibility. When schedules don't cooperate, going back again to that schedule, when we know that those schedules won't cooperate, it's very rare that we hit 100% all of the schedules and all of the estimates, especially in very large projects. It's so rare that we actually hit and are 100% accurate on our estimates. So we have to be able to have the mindset of not if the schedules won't cooperate, but when the schedules won't cooperate. So having that plan in B and C, instead of though us taking in and working those long hours and extending our time and working the weekends to try and save the sprint, we look for ways that are equitable. We first incorporate our capacity and bandwidth in a pragmatic way. And really what that means is each of you should know what your capacity and bandwidth is on your project team, your squad, your agile team, whatever the terminology that you use to designate the team that you are working with on the day-to-day. Excuse me. You have to really take into account what your true capacity and bandwidth is. And because of that, we should only have a limited amount of time or a set amount of time per day or per week or per sprint that is designated for these testing types of activities. And one of the ways that we do that in a pragmatic way is that we use those risk-based testing approaches. And then we guide the team to decide the next steps, right? So something like this would look like, hey, these stories are piling up. It's sprint day 8. We have 2 more days left in the sprint. We have more than half of our stories that are being complete by dev, and we expect that all of these stories are going to kind of start rolling in those last couple of days of the sprint, which of course then would mean that we would not have the original amount of time to spend on those, again, because we have a finite set of time in there. So instead of us making the decision on our own to stay late or to work the weekend to save the sprint, we bring that back to the team and we come back with some options. One option might be, hey, within my bandwidth for the rest of the sprint, I'm going to be focusing on these highest priority tests, which I have already prioritized using a priority 1 through 3 scale or something similar. And then that means that we may go to production at risk without having the rest of these tests tested or executed. And that might be the decision that the squad or the team makes rather than it being fully on the team's shoulders. And again, I can kind of go through some examples on that as well. What other types of risk-based testing approaches can we use and apply when those schedules don't cooperate? The other alternative, the lazy tester's way, when we think about kind of testing in present state or very near past state, we gain insight into both explicit and implicit testing activities because we ask, right? So when we start forming relationships with our software engineers, our product managers or product owners or business analysts, anyone that is on the squad and on the team working with us, we are gaining insight into the testing activities that they do on their own, especially those activities that are not traditionally documented. And we ensure, or we ask them if that's part of their normal repeatable process. And we do push sometimes the onus on them, or we might look at what they generally check on their own. And even if we have documented tests that cover those flows or cover those activities, we may deprioritize because we know that somebody else on the team is testing in that same manner. So when we do get to the situation where our schedules get compressed, we have been able to deprioritize some of those tests because we know that those testing activities are already being handled because we're asking them instead of just relying on straight up documentation. And one of the last things that we do, like when the alternative, the lazy testers way on kind of present day of testing, is we stay in our lane until we can be lazy with our teammates. And really what I mean by that is that we stay in our lane because whenever we allow continuously for schedules to creep up and we just make the decision on our own to save the schedule and work longer hours, it actually results in a lot of imbalance for velocity, right? So we really can learn from a lot of those situations that cause those schedules to be compressed or cause the schedules to not be able to be met in the appropriate or the first estimated time. And a lot of times then that becomes the expectation of QA. Well, I can be late in delivering this work because I know my QA person will stay late, or she and I will stay late and test it together, right? And again, not necessarily a bad decision, but you can see that if that decision happens every week or every sprint, and now all of a sudden the QA person, because the first couple of sprints, they took it upon themselves to save the sprint, now that becomes the expectation. So I caution us to stay in our lane, specifically because as we all know, the shortest and most efficient path between 2 points is a straight line. So when we stay in our lane and that lane is straight there, that is the most efficient. And sometimes the most efficient thing to do to gain optimization is to let some things fail, as long as we are willing and able to have those widespread conversations with our project team or squad when things are going to fail. Instead of us being always in the situation to save the sprint, sometimes it's better for us to stay in our lane, keep that most efficient path, and be able to make sure that bad behavior is not being conducted, and it's not being conducive to effective team dynamics, right? So we want to use that, the three musketeers kind of term, all for one for all. But sometimes we have to have those hard decisions and we have to have those hard conversations when we are enabling bad behavior of our squad or project team counterparts. But most importantly, we want to drive those conversations real time as they are happening. And while they're fresh on your mind, we want to be able to say, hey, I've run out of time because my bandwidth is now exceeded for the next 2 days on this sprint. I need help. And not just I need help, but I need help. And here is my recommendation or a few options that we as a team can discuss to move forward. If you're coming to this table only with issues and not possible solutions, that will quickly grate on your teammates' nerves. So I wanted to talk a little bit about a story, as I mentioned. So I've been in some sort of software testing, QA, quality engineering for now 27 years of my career. And almost the high majority of those have been as software tester, QA, quality engineers. And as of course, since I allude to the term quality engineer for the last 15 years or so, I focused really on fine tuning the role of quality engineering to kind of disrupt the industry, right? So I'm a firm believer at the moment of quality engineering, and I say at the moment because who knows what may come next. But at today, I am a firm believer of quality engineering. But before I wasn't. And I fell under a very brand new manager. I was promoted into the director, and through an acquisition, I had my team of about 30 folks localized in the US and Colorado, turned into about 150 global quality assurance at that point. And as we were moving into quality engineers, so my team almost overnight exponentially grew. And I was a people pleaser and a manager pleaser at that time. I'd just been promoted, and I was told that automation is where the future of QA is going to go. So we want to make everybody on the team, the 150 quality engineers, we want to make them all automation engineers, and we want to have a number of test cases. We want to meet 85% of all test cases to be automated. And those were metrics that were given to me that I was asked to report on and to march towards. And being the new leader and new manager that I nodded my head and said, yes, sir, I will certainly do that. And I went in and started this program to convert everybody on the team into automation engineers, and to then move everybody into not only the full training on that, but then we were going to then go back into all of our test cases housed in a test case management tool and automate up to 85% of those. And those were the guidance and direction I gave to the team. Well, as you can probably imagine, that did not go over well. My story ends somewhat into disaster, where we lost some of the best people that I've ever worked with because they didn't want to necessarily just be automation engineers. And for me, because A, I was new, and because B, I didn't have a lot of insight into why automation was important. I just nodded my head and said, yes, I will do it. I lost a lot of people, and it really made me think our quest should not be a number or a percentage, and having that equate into some sort of sense of false quality, right? And if I've learned anything in my career, it's that it's not just a numbers game, it's a numbers and people game. But people are the first point. And people really need to have some ownership into the numbers, than simply just the numbers, right? So we want to have that kind of sense of camaraderie whenever we're creating metrics that folks will need to measure and report on. But this gave me one of the starkest lessons. I almost ended my career in abysmal failure at that time because I lost so many great people because I blindly did rather than think about what was happening and the value. And by that, we managed the team by a metric that didn't add much value. And in the outcome was that I was down by several key team members, and I had to essentially build and rebuild that organization back up because I did rather than think first. So let's apply some of the counterparts there with test automation, right? So we talked about kind of the overall testing and present state and some of the things that we may be experiencing on the day-to-day or sprint to sprint. So let's talk about test automation. Generally speaking, right, when we think about test automation, it's monolithic. That term may ring with you, especially in the DevOps world of monolithic is bad, and move away from monolithic. But generally speaking, it's monolithic, right? We have big multi-hour suites. We have to kick them off at the end of the day, so that they don't cause any noise for normal testing activities during the day, or interfere with other testing that's happening during normal business hours. And we run these huge, big multi-hour suites that are off hours or overnight. And what happens to those results, right? So we may run these results, and first thing in the morning, we come in and we check those results, and they're usually vetted out by QA or QE only, because we're generally the ones that have created these suites of tests that run off hours or overnight. and, you know, sometimes we place them in a lone Slack channel, or there's an email notification or something, but it's all in like a pretty small audience, right? So we kind of create this monolithic test run that is our regression suite, or it's our smoke test suite, or whatever we call that. But it's generally done in a silo and out of really kind of most people on the team's visibility and observation, right? It becomes that numbers game again. Like we're managed by, well, I want to see X number of test cases automated, or I want to see us to have X number of coverage in automation or something like that, right? And again, not necessarily automation is a key component to quality engineering. I am a full firm supporter and believer in that. I'm suggesting that we maybe relook at how we have measured and have determined value of automation, so that it does not become a simple numbers game. And again, you know, mentioned this earlier, but we've had this kind of false sense of comfort that a certain percentage of test cases automated somehow equates to a higher quality product that we're delivering, right? And of course, we know that that's not necessarily true. So how would the lazy tester approach test automation? Well, we want to provide the most valuable information first and as soon as possible, right? So we're thinking before we're acting. We're looking at what is the team or the squad interested in at this point, right? And the only way that I'm going to know that is by forging those relationships, having those conversations, driving some of the information that we are uncovering either during our test management phase or actual test execution phase, or what we're doing. But we want to be able to provide that information in the quickest amount of time. So if you go back into that monolithic, we're running that suite, taking 6 to 8 hours overnight, that's not providing the most valuable information as soon as possible. I've been introducing this term called tests as a service approach for the last few months here. And I think this really has grounded us. I think that this really will create, and we're doing this experimentally right now in my company. But really what I mean by tests as a service is that we're organizing our tests in the same way relatively that our software engineers are organized, right? And so sometimes our software engineers they have a concentration and a skill set within a certain area of the code, right? And so they become that subject matter expert within certain areas of the code. The test as a service approach, really the outcome is that when we create tests, they should follow a certain guideline and standard, what I kind of call prime time, that allows for centralized. They're centralized. They are and can be run by any member of the team. And they are findable and reachable and searchable because they are organized in the way that has made sense and that makes sense to how the actual team and specifically the software engineers are organized. And that centralization really is key, because it's one thing to say, oh, I've automated this and now we're good, or I have these tests ready to go and I'm the only one that can run them because they're local on my machine, or they're not intuitive enough for anyone else, so let me just run them myself, right? What we're saying with tests as a service is that we are creating tests that will eventually be executed by any member of the team, whether it be a human member of the team, or if we're actually creating them in a framework, more of an automated fashion where framework or tool to run those, right? So the understanding is that we're now putting that different lens on our tests to say, when the rest of my team runs a certain subset of tests, I want them to have the responsibility of regression testing on their own, so that it doesn't become QA or QE's responsibility to regression test. And we will provide those tests as a service for those software engineers to test their own code. And I have done the extra few steps of organizing these tests in the way that I know that the software engineering team is also able to run them, and they're intuitive enough to be able to do that, right? So we're delivering those tests for eventual being rerun and run as much as possible by any other member of the team, so that we're focusing our time on those areas that we have uncovered are at risk, or via context-driven techniques need to be critically looked at because of where they would result in issues if we let those particular defects be released into production. Okay, so again, test as a service allows the software engineers to validate on their own for regressions, right? And the final thing is kind of using a tiered approach, right? So break down that monolithic 6 to 8 hour to 12-hour monolithic automated suite that runs after hours or on the weekend or at night, and use a tiered approach, or what I like to call multiple runs for multiple dones, right? So if the idea is to get the right information back to the team or back to individuals as soon as possible, the way that we will do that is to not make them wait hours and hours for a suite to run, but to wait seconds at the maximum, maybe in a couple of minutes there, depending on how big and how critical those tests are. But when we put that lens on, what we're saying here is smaller, centralized, and more efficient suites of tests that provide that more concentrated and quicker feedback to the whole team. So that all kind of culminates into this last into this quote here. Test automation makes humans more efficient, not less essential. And I know that when a lot of us, especially if we have maybe a little bit of a outdated or archaic view of what test automation value brings to it, a lot of us wonder, is there really a need for testers, quality engineers, or humans, right? Because we're all humans here. Well, at least some of us are. And I had to put in this picture of Mark Zuckerberg, depending on if whether you are a Mark Zuckerberg fan or not. The jury's out on whether or not he's really truly human. But the point is that we're human, and we get things done because we are able to forge relationships and not simply look again at the numbers, right? So let's think about a couple of ways that we can now bring these team and human dynamics and advocate for testing at more of those agile ceremonies that we tend to have in here, right? So let's look at refinement. Most of you, if not all of you, are probably practicing some flavor of agile right now. And let's talk about what present state refinement looks like, right? So it's the entire project team plus the lurkers, and lurkers might be, you know, VPs or directors of engineering or stakeholders that are in the room, and they want to hear what we're refining so that they have a say in it, even though they may not actually have a say or have responsibility in doing the work. These refinements look huge. They're the entire team, and they are in a room, virtual or physical. And the idea is to cram as many possible stories or tickets in the allotted time for this refinement, right? So you may have a stretch goal of trying to do 15 tickets or stories in an hour. And the idea is not necessarily to refine the work, but it's to get through the list, right? And it's generally one and done. You generally have one refinement session, again, quickly trying to get through the list of refinement so that we can get the backlog ready so the team can work. And it's one and done. And we very rarely have extra conversations about that, because the next response would be, well, I can't get the whole team together. Everybody's calendars are a mess. So we're just going to have to figure it out, and we'll have to figure out how to refine all the stories on this list in an hour or an hour and a half, however much time we have designated for that, right? So being lazy, how would the lazy tester look at this? And by the way, I know that we have sometimes used the term grooming. I'm going to just put a little bit of a PSA here and say, let's just collectively agree that we should be using the term refinements rather than grooming. There's a lot of historical things around that term grooming, but for our purposes here, refinements, right? So what the lazy tester would say was like, look, yes, we do need to get through a certain amount of tickets, but let's do it in smaller working groups, to where the people who actually are going to be assigned to these groups of tickets are now meeting in smaller groups, to where we're now actively conversing and actively collaborating on the refinement. So remove the entire project team and let's start grouping folks together into their either specialized area of the code, or let's start getting QE in there, where small working groups, to where our outcomes are shorter times, because we are concentrated in talking with the right people in a smaller chunkable working time in there. everyone's represented. Anyone that has responsibility to deliver work on that story is represented in those refinements so that we know everything in there. And most importantly, what I like to talk about is we actually refine that work to the point where we're talking about what do we need to collectively do to make this thing shippable to our users. A lot of times when we're in refinement, we focus on the dev complete. This is what I'm going to do as a developer. This is what I'm going to do as a tester. And this is what I'm going to do as a product manager. I'm going to accept this work. But we rarely actually have conversations about now, once all of that work is complete, what are the things that we need to ensure we build in and validate in order to make this shippable? And it's a tiered approach, as I mentioned earlier, multiple runs for multiple dones. But that really means when we talk about refinement, that we don't stop at one meeting. We meet and collaborate frequently, with the end result of a refinement being that everyone that has responsibility to deliver something on that story or group of stories can nod their head and say, yes, I have what I need to begin my work. If not everybody can nod their head, that story or body of work should not be considered refined, and it should not be ready to work on. We continue to refine it until everybody gets to thumbs up on that one. So one of the other things is team demos. And again, we're talking about things now that the person, the lazy tester, can start thinking about when it comes to team dynamics, right? So let's talk about how team demos happen at this point, or any kind of demo, right? They generally happen at the end of a sprint or end of a cycle of work. Okay, everybody, we're going to get in a room. We're going to be in a large group, probably the entire team, plus the same lurkers that may have come to your refinement session a couple weeks before that. And generally speaking, if a discrepancy is found, it's either moved to the next sprint, or it halts or hinders the release, right? So by waiting until that last part, until all the work is done to do the demos, we are introducing some risk here and some inefficiencies. So how would the lazy tester approach team demos? So one thing that I've found a lot of success in is that we have the demos actually happen from dev or software engineer to QE and PO at the time of the work. Or anyone else on the team right after that work is complete, and sometime before that code gets merged in, or right after that code gets merged in, before it's called ready to test, we like to have the software engineers actually demo the AC right then and there before the work comes into test. And certainly before the PO accepts the work on behalf of the team, right? And sometimes that can happen in just a few minutes. Sometimes we put that right after the stand-up, or we do it ad hoc in a way. But really the idea here is that we're shifting that acceptance and the demo of work to where a discrepancy might be found or a misalignment may be found. And then we have to go all the way back there, right? So we're catching this early, we're shifting this way left. Of course, the shift left approach is nothing new. You've probably all heard about it. But really it's where it belongs in this situation, right? And so obviously we know the closer it's a lot more expensive, so to speak, to fix bugs or issues, the further it gets from the developer who wrote that particular code. And so we want to shift those demos before test gets it, so that we're all aligned on the AC, so that we never have to have any more discrepancies around AC. And for those of you who struggle with having AC, we know that it's the most important delivery item. AC essentially equals MVP when we deliver a set of software. I mean, you can literally say, okay, this body of work had a total of 150 acceptance criteria in all the tickets. That essentially equates to the MVP of that release or that sprint. And it's the most important delivery item. So we really want to anchor to the AC as early on to ensure 100% alignment, and especially as we move into testing, because that's going to guide us, not necessarily we need to validate that. We want to see software engineers validate that they have met that requirements of the AC. So all of that kind of combines into, when I say quality engineering, those are some of the components of what makes an excellent quality engineer, is to think about the lazy part of it and move into efficiency and optimization, with the final outcome of being quality engineering and driving some of those characteristics within your own team to influence the building of the software before the software is built. So you can see that shift left is coming in here. We are taking part in a lot of those meetings and planning before, and we are advocating for testing as a shared responsibility amongst the team. And all of that, plus some other things, culminates into the quality engineer. So what can you do? So first, be thoughtful. Think before you act. Before you take your first steps, either have a well thought out and well-oiled plan, or take a few seconds or a few minutes to think about that plan before acting. And most importantly, be lazy. So with that said, here's my contact information, and I will go ahead and turn it over and see if there are any questions. All right, I think.
Hey, Melissa.
Hello.
So first of all, thank you for a very inspiring talk. I must say that some of your ideas are so relevant, not only to testing, but to actual life and career. So thanks for that. We do have a few questions from our audience. So one of them is, how can you shift demos to the left? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think the demos are really one of those things that we have seen so much more efficiency gained there. A lot of the biggest pushback you're going to get is, well, I don't have time to demo this too. Let's just wait until the end of the sprint, right? And generally boils down to, I don't have time to do it. We already have the demo scheduled on our calendar. Let's just wait until then. So some of it really is just kind of advocating for the shift left, sometimes by simply stating shift left. That triggers in brains, and they're like, oh, we do want to shift left. Yes, that makes sense. Sometimes it's as easy as that. Other times it's not as easy as that. So the way that we really frame that when we suggest kind of shifting the demos to the left is really, we talk about aligning the AC, and especially for teams where you have gotten into the point where it is a full-fledged demo at the end of the sprint and you've had to kick back work, or work wasn't as complete as thought, or somebody that was not the product manager or product owner or stakeholder has questions and they want more work to be done, right? If you've been in that situation, it's generally it's well received when an alternative to those situations are being brought in, right? So if you can kind of ride that wave of, we've had a few demos that have resulted in work being kicked back, that can generally be your advocacy right there. What I've seen is, by then anchoring those demos from software engineering or dev to both QE and PO at the same time, and generally right at the time of the stand-up when the entire team is likely going to still be around, then you anchor to the AC. It's a simple, I'm going to demo the AC just, again, to ensure alignment. So using those terms and the narrative alignment, avoiding kickback of work or rollover of work, and if that is a thing that seems to be plaguing your teams, those generally have worked in my career of being able to advocate for those demos shifting left.
Brilliant. Great. If anyone has more questions, you can use the Q&A, by the way. I didn't say that. You have a Q&A button. We have a question from Pam. She's asking, how do you address the issue where the user story with too many acceptance criteria?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of different opinions on that, right? And I think too many acceptance criteria, that's definitely going to be subjective and relative to that person. There are a lot of thought leaders in Agile that have their own kind of algorithm or equation on how many AC is the optimum AC to have in there. But if you have not already had a working agreements meeting with your team, right? And a working agreements just essentially says, look, this is how we agree to work together. When we move tickets through these columns, whether you're using Jira or something similar, we have a very clear definition of what is happening in those columns, and more importantly, what needs to happen in order for work to flow into that column, and what has to happen and be complete for the work to flow out and continue to go to the right to eventual shipping. So If you have not had that working agreements meeting where you can suggest, if you have an opinion, Pam, on how many AC is optimum for you, then I would strongly suggest getting a working agreements meeting on the calendar, because if we don't know how to work together, and if we don't have those very simple definitions of what happens in those columns, or what's happening from a software engineer to a quality engineer to a product owner, then we're going to have a lot of opinions, and those opinions won't ever really reach to alignment. So if you have a recommendation on how many is the optimum, I would certainly recommend that to the team, and partner up with whoever is responsible for writing stories in your company or your team. The other way is, I think I personally like user stories in a small enough package to where delivery can happen every day, right? So, and again, that is Melissa's opinion and kind of what I've seen work in my specific companies that I've worked with. But I like to tend to size stories out so that the work involved, where there's a delivery of about every day, if not more than one a day per the software engineers, in which case then you would need to figure out what those optimum ACs are. But at the end of the day, the ACs are the anchor to what the story should be doing. In my opinion, the software engineers should be 100% responsible for being able to deliver and demo and show that they have met that AC by that very simple demo. And at that point, once everyone is agreed that the demo is met, especially your product owner who will eventually be accepting the work on behalf of the team, then that removes QE from needing to spend a lot of time there. If we are getting that demo from dev, and then we are immediately validating that those ACs are met, the first thing that we do when we get that story in test, that's duplication at that point, right? Or we're focusing on the wrong thing at the wrong time. We already saw the demo. The product owner has already agreed, regardless of the number of ACs that were walked through. If that was agreed to, then we focus our efforts outside of the AC. We use them to anchor our testing, but we don't necessarily need to go through line by line by line by line on those. And we focus our effort on areas that have not previously been tested, because we've had those conversations with dev and product to see what they're going to be doing, right? So that all kind of goes in there. So I don't have a number of ACs that I recommend. I like to look at work in half day to 1 day increments, but a working agreements meeting would be one of those ways that you can recommend and suggest the optimum number that you like for AC, and see what kind of conversation gets started there.
Okay, so Pam is actually re-asking. She's asking in continuation to your answer, what do you do when demo is only the overview and not the entire AC? Should the demo be on all scenarios on the AC?
So the way that I describe it here, if we shift the demo left from the software engineer, I am literally saying that it is truly an AC walkthrough, and that could be as a demo. If you think about the role of the product owner, they are accepting the work via acceptance criteria to say, yes, we have met the goals of what we intended to do, right? So, which is why that AC and everything around building that AC is so fundamental and important to team success. So in this scenario, if you shift that demo to the left, then it becomes an AC walkthrough for alignment. And then at the end of that sprint, if product wants to walk through the demo for other stakeholders and then put their flavor of what they want to demo, that's perfectly acceptable, because now that demo belongs to product, and they can speak to stakeholders that may be asking, well, why did we build it this way? Or what was because they're really the ones that are owning kind of the what and the why we're building something. And the engineering folks, software and quality engineering, are owning the how are we going to do it? So I prefer to have that shift left demo walk through the AC only, and then having, if needed, a demo from product to the rest of the stakeholders, out to other folks at the end, and let product really handle that one. Because at that time, it doesn't become this is wrong, I found a bug, I found an issue, it becomes more of a conversation about what are we going to do about this functionality the next time, and how are we going to enhance it the next time.
Okay, I really want to ask you more questions, but that's a problem. I don't know what about you, but here it's already 6 p.m.
Yes.
So I'm just going to, first of all, thank you so much for a very good webinar and a very interesting webinar and very interesting insights. I wanted to thank everyone who came and listened. I also want to remind you about our online test conf and invite you all to sign up. And I hope to see you all in our next webinars and training session. And Melissa, I hope we get to see each other again soon as well.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. Enjoy.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.